Welcome back to Oregon Public Retirement. I'm Daniel Ryan, certified financial planner and IRS enrolled agent, as well as author of the book Oregon Public Retirement. Today's topic is all about the final average salary. So let's get into it. The final average salary is only for those of you who are going to be calculated under what's called full formula. If you don't know already, there are technically three different calculations on the PERS pension. For example, a Tier 1 member could be calculated under formula plus annuity, full formula, or money match. Those of you who are going to be in the formula plus annuity would have to have been hired before 1982, and that is less than 2% of PERS members, so we're not going to be focusing on that component today. If you're in money match as a Tier 1 member or potentially a Tier 2 member, then you will also not need to know anything about the final average salary, because that takes different considerations based on your age and account balance. But for everyone else, which is over 90% of Oregon PERS members, you will be calculated using full formula. There are three components when you factor in full formula. The first one is your final average salary. You multiply that by your creditable years of service, and then lastly, a factor of 1.67% if you're in Tier 1 or Tier 2, or if you are in the Oregon Public Service Retirement Plan or OPSRP, the factor is 1.5%. Whenever possible, I love to simplify the pension. If I multiply 30 years times 1.5% for OPSRP members, that's 45% of your final average salary. For Tier 1 and Tier 2 members, 1.67% times 30 years would in fact be 50.1%. If you are in police and fire, it is slightly different numbers. So it's going to be 2% if you are in Tier 1 or Tier 2, and 1.8% for those of you who are in OPSRP. That being said, today we're not focusing on the factors of percentages. We are focusing on final average salary. The way that PERS looks at your final average salary is looking at two different ways to either calculate your last 36 months or your highest 3 calendar years. For Tier 1 and Tier 2 members, those years don't have to be consecutive, but if you are in the OPSRP pension, they do need to be consecutive. So let's look at an example. What if you were a school administrator maybe a decade ago and you did 2 full calendar years, which probably would have been 2 or 3 school years, and you had really good income during that time, but you just got burnt out and you needed to go back into either regular teaching or classified staff or whatever other job you might have had within the PERS system. If you then kept working, you naturally would reach a pretty high salary anyways 10 years later. Let's say you're a teacher. So if you're a Tier 1 or Tier 2 person, they will cherry pick and take those 2 calendar years from before and that last full calendar year right before you retired in that example. For an OPSRP member, they would again need to all three be consecutive years. And again, it's calendar years, which for school teachers can get a little tricky because your contract is usually based from summer to summer. So that being said, what's the big deal? Well, we also have some other considerations with your salary. So let's use an example. If you had made $118,000 and then you had made $120,000 and then the next year $122,000, they would add up all three of those years, making $360,000 divided by 36 months. That will give you a final average monthly salary of exactly $10,000. Now, what about other considerations like sick time or vacation time? If you're Tier 1, you can actually put in your vacation time. And if you're Tier 1 or Tier 2, you get half credit for your sick time. That's pretty incredible. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say that you had the same $360,000 of 3 years of salaries that we're going to divide by 36 months. Well, then we say, hey, you actually have an hourly salary of $60 per hour. So they'll give you half credit for all of your sick hours. So let's say that you have 1,200 hours of sick time by the time you get ready to retire. And your employer does have to participate in the sick leave program. If that be the case, like most school districts and most employers here in Oregon, then you would get $30 times 1,200. In that case, that would give you an additional $36,000 in conjunction with the original $360,000. So now we divide that number, which is $396,000, divided by 36 months, which increased your final average salary to now $11,000 per month instead of $10,000. That is the impact that sick time especially can really create for people. So it's really important that you run that number. Now let's go back to my original example where you had a tier 1 or tier 2 person and they had 30 years and they multiplied that by 1.67%, giving you 50.1%. Let's say 50% for making the math simple. You would take 50% times $10,000 if you didn't have any sick time in this example, giving you a potential pension of an option 1 amount of $5,000 per month for the rest of your life. We just finally calculated your pension for you. This is simply an example, but then we said, well, what's the difference if I have that 1,200 hours of sick time? Well, we would take 50% of now $11,000, which of course is $5,500, increasing the overall benefit by $500 a month for the rest of your life. That's a pretty big deal. Now, these are again examples. We don't know exactly how much sick time you have. We don't know how much you're being compensated or what your hourly rate is, but it's helpful to actually talk through how that final average salary works. Now that you know the information about the final average salary, what can you do about it? Well, if you have the opportunity to work overtime, or if you're a school teacher, maybe that includes summer school, or you might be able to take on extra responsibilities. Some school districts, for example, will allow you to be the overseer of a club or take on extra stipends or other type of work. All of that counts towards your actual working salary and thus allows you to get a boosted pension if they look at your last 36 months or your highest 3 years. A lot of firefighters and even police officers will do this as well. They'll take on those extra shifts right before they get to retirement, knowing that those last 36 months, they got to make them look as good as possible. Now, there's also another consideration or strategy. If you, for example, are feeling a little burnt out, let's say that you're a tier 1 member and you got hired when you were 22. Well, now you're 47 and you're 25 years into the pension program. You know that your normal retirement age is either once you hit 30 years, which is age 52, or if you didn't get to 30 years and you quit now, you have to wait to get that calculation at age 58. So what you might decide to do is look at what your last 36 months look like right now. And then as long as you continue to get more than 600 hours, technically 50 hours per month, on average for the next 5 years, you will still hit 30 years of service. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're 47, tier 1, and you have 25 years of service. You're thinking to yourself, I cannot do this for 5 more years. What am I going to do? If you just left and started either working in the private sector or in a different state, or you just didn't work at all, then to get the calculation that I just mentioned, you would have to wait until 58, which is 11 years later, right? That's a big bummer. Instead, if you had just finished your last 5 years and actually gotten to the 30-year mark, then you could actually retire with the full pension calculation that I just provided. So instead of just leaving and then having to wait 11 years to get a pension with only 25 years of service credit, you might instead say, well, as a teacher or whatever your position is, I've already got 3 calendar years that look pretty good. Thus, you could actually continue to get full service credit and hit 30 years, which then allows you to retire with 30 years, and then that will be multiplied by your high 3 calendar years that you had when you were probably 45, 46, and 47. So that is another strategy that helps a lot of people who are wondering, how am I ever going to get there if I didn't get to 30 years? Well, if you continue to work part-time, 50 hours a month, which is about 10 hours a week on average, then you can actually get that full calculation and get there at 52, which is 6 years sooner than age 58. Not to mention, you would have your final average salary multiplied by 30 years, which of course makes a huge difference. So these are just some of the strategies that you can employ to get the best final average salary.